We have heard the joyful sound. Jesus saves, spread the tidings all around. Jesus saves, bear the news to every man. Like the sea the waves, onward till the Lord's command. Jesus saves, give the wind a mighty voice. Jesus saves, let the nations now rejoice. Jesus saves, shall salvation full and free. I still the deepest cave, is the song of victory. Jesus saves,
Abraham took a second wife at that time, and Sarah gave her approval and gave her to be his wife. Hagar conceived and Ishmael was born. And then Sarah also conceived, and soon after Isaac was born. Pardon me? Yes. Yes. Yeah, he had two wives. Yeah, looking at some of the commentaries, one we were looking at yesterday mentioned this idea of taking a servant, a concubine, multiple wives. The commentary just says it was according to the culture at that time. But when you think about it, whose culture? Whose culture were they looking at or comparing themselves to? Because this is Abraham, this is the father of the Jewish nation, so it wasn't Jewish culture as yet, because they weren't there yet. So maybe Egyptian culture, I don't know. Okay. We'll go on a little further here, and I think you'll agree how this works out. When problems started up between Ishmael and Hagar and Sarah, anybody remember what started to take place? Remember, it was Sarah's idea for Abraham to take a second wife, to take her servant. But okay. Yeah, that's the way it says it. That yeah, they started to have problems, and you can just imagine how that would happen, because Sarah was unable to have a child, apparently. She hadn't had one yet, and Hagar has one, no problem. And so there was some jealousy, there was some hatred, there was some probably mocking going on. I think mocking was the word it used when it referred to Ishmael. He was mocking her. So what was Sarah's idea to bring it into this problem. Okay. Sarah just said, and it's not servant anymore. Sarah told Abraham to get rid of that slave woman and her son. She didn't want any competition with her son, especially as far as the promises and the inheritance and so forth. Just get rid of her. Now in Genesis chapter 21, verse 8 through 21, Abraham sent them away, or he put them out, or he put them aside, different words that amount to the same thing. Right, yeah. Abraham was concerned about it because that was his son, and he was worried about that. God told him to go ahead and do what Sarah was telling him. Whatever Sarah tells you, go ahead with it. So Hagar and Ishmael were put out, and she wandered around in the desert for a while until she ran out of water. And at that point, she was ready to die. She had already accepted that that was going to be her fate. For both her and her son, they were going to die. Why did she leave him and go on a little further away from Ishmael? Yeah, she couldn't bear the thought of seeing him die, so she separated themselves. But God stepped in, and you probably all know the rest of the story. There was a well nearby, and they got water, and they survived. But through many years in the Jewish nation, what happened here became common practice. Men were putting their wives aside for any and whatever reason. And there was no paperwork involved or anything else. It just, they had a wife and they were displeased and they put her aside. But if not for the certificate of divorce, a woman would find herself in a very sticky mess. She'd have no husband to care for her. She'd be destitute, and many times no family either, as was Hagar's position. She came with them from Egypt at some point or another. I don't know how they got an Egyptian servant, but she didn't have family, she didn't have husband. She was destitute, wandering around in the desert, and figured, we're going to die. She had no idea how to take care of herself. So this is the same position many women over the years were finding themselves in. If not for the certificate of divorce, the woman had no way to continue on. But the certificate, with that, she was allowed, according to the law from Moses, to remarry. So the certificate of divorce protected her in that way, because now she could legally remarry. I don't know that for sure. Yeah, I don't know that for sure. I'd have to go back and look that part up. But this certificate that we're talking about, this certificate of divorce, to the Jewish people became this seal of approval, and really opened the floodgates as far as Jewish men being allowed to divorce for just about any reason. All I got to do is give you this certificate, and we're done. So it just multiplied and multiplied and multiplied. I don't know how many hundreds of years had transpired while this was going on, and how it got to be the way it was. Today, here in the USA, in most states, you can divorce without any reason at all. All you have to do is waltz in and tell the judge, we have irreconcilable differences. And that's all it takes. Do you recall back when those laws were changed? Was there any opposition to those laws? Nobody knows? I'm sorry. No, and we're going to get to that. But as far as the laws of the land go, there have been many changes. It used. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I don't remember exactly what the laws were, but it seemed like somewhere around the time I was very young is when some of these laws began to change. And I remember people talking about it, and I don't know if there was any formal opposition to it. I know that the Roman Catholic Church was in opposition to it, and they wouldn't recognize the divorce except it be for fornication or for unfaithfulness. But today the law stands in the land. If you have irreconcilable difference, you can be separated, and that's the end of that. Today, the latest thing is we have same-sex marriage, which just seems to me to be so much worse, so much. It just repulses you. I have to remind myself that sin is sin, and the results of sin is the same. And it only takes one sin to be guilty of the whole law. But still, you can see this progression that the United States is on, that most states are on, going so far from God's Word. You hate to have to go to court anymore because it's all going to be according to heathen law. Right. So can you imagine how these Jews and this crowd felt as they heard Jesus speaking? Hundreds and hundreds of years of tradition and laws that they thought were accurate, and then Jesus tells them what we just read in verses 31 and 32. You see why they got a little bit angry. They thought they were so righteous. But when Jesus begins to explain to them, you don't have to kill somebody. If you hate him, you're guilty already. You're in the same judgment. You don't have to actually have adultery with somebody. If you're sitting there and you're desiring somebody and you're lusting after somebody, you're already guilty. And the divorce thing that you have, or they may have had multiple divorces, they're not really counting either. So these people have to be going nuts, really, in what they're hearing. In Matthew 19, verse 3 through 9, the question comes up again at another time. Some Pharisees came to him to test him. What's it usually mean when it says they came to him to test him? Okay, looking for a contradiction, to say something different than what they already knew or understood. Somebody else had, trying to get him to look bad, incriminate himself, okay? So they came to him to test him. I guess you could say it's the Moses test, because that's the law they understood and were going by, and even though it may have been changed and perverted and twisted throughout the years, it was still the law. That's what they went by. They asked, is it lawful for a man to divorce his wife for any and every reason? What do you suppose they were thinking? What did they think the answer was? Okay. Yeah, they were putting their wives aside before Moses delivered the law to them. Right, we're going to get there in just a minute. Just wanted to ask that question to get that thought in your mind as to what were these guys thinking. Let's go test Jesus. Let's go see what he says and ask him this question. When actually, according to the commentaries, at any given time in the Jewish nation, they were divided on a lot of these issues. There were a lot of Jews who thought, yeah, the certificate of divorce is all you need. Moses said so. You write a certificate of divorce and you're done. But there was just as many who said, no, it's like James said, it should be one husband, one wife. And you shouldn't be able to divorce for just any reason. So that's what kind of makes you wonder, what these guys expect. They already knew there was divisions among the Jewish nation on what that law really meant and how it should be interpreted. So we'll just try Jesus and see what he has to say. And he immediately quotes what Sonny was just bringing up in verse 4, Matthew 19, verse 4. He says, haven't you read how did I type this out all wrong? Haven't you read, is what he replied, that at the beginning the Creator made them male and female. This goes all the way back to Genesis, to the beginning, just like he said, in the beginning. Genesis 1:27, they were created male and female. And Genesis 2:24 explains that that's the reason the man will leave his mother and father and be united to his wife, and the two will become one flesh. Verse 6 says, so they are no longer two but one. Therefore what God has joined together, let man not separate. These are the words you hear often read when? At the divorce? At a wedding. At weddings where you hear them. They're not mentioned at the divorce. They have a thing nowadays, not just for rich people, they call it prenuptial agreement, that man and a woman, before their engagement, they sit down and discuss, what are we going to do when we divorce? How are we going to divide up our physical things? Where are we going to split the line? And don't we have it kind of backwards? Really, the prenuptial agreement should be, what are we going to do when we have a problem? How are we going to make this work? How are we going to solve it? How are we going to stay together? Instead, it's before they even get married, they're making plans for divorce. Any thoughts or comments before we get back to, back in verse 7, Matthew 19, verse 7, these men who came to trip him up, came to test him out, see what he had to say. Why then, they asked, did Moses command that a man give his wife a certificate of divorce and send her away? They're going back to the gold standard. Moses, the law of Moses. Moses told them clearly in Deuteronomy 24:1, you're going to get rid of your pretty little woman, you give her a divorce, you write a certificate. So then she's able to survive, she's able to continue life in some way or another. Jesus replied in verse 8, Moses permitted you to divorce your wives because your hearts were hard. And that's what we were talking about, and I was trying to show you as far back, the furthest back I could think of was Abraham. There may be some more recorded that I didn't think about. That men would put away their women, put away their wives for whatever reason. And because their hearts were hard by the time the Ten Commandments were delivered, Moses permitted it, and the only thing he added was that certificate of divorce. But Jesus says it was not this way from the beginning. Though they were putting away women before Moses' time, Jesus tells them, I tell you in verse 9, that anyone who divorces his wife except for marital unfaithfulness and marries another woman commits adultery. Even the disciples were troubled at this saying. What was their comment, you remember? Yeah, their first instinct was, if we can't have a prenup, we better not get into this at all. We're not going to make this clear. I mean, it was totally clear before. I can marry her, and if she turns out to be a loser, I can just write her off, get rid of her. If that's not the case, I'm not going to get into this mess. But even the disciples were troubled at what he was saying. So you can imagine how some of the hardened Pharisees and scribes and those who clung to the law, how they must have felt. Mm-hmm. Well, that's probably, places like that and inclinations like that is why they weren't in 100% agreement about what the law said. But there is no question that the great majority of them took that certificate, that writing certificate of divorce, to be the get out of jail free card. But what did it come down to hundreds of years later was you write the paper and you're done. And it could be she couldn't cook, she didn't clean, whatever. No, don't say that. Yeah, they didn't have equal treatment under any kind of laws, the women at that time. But Jesus treated them equally. So the disciples are saying, man, it's better we just don't marry. We just forget about it. Who else said anything like that? Yeah, Paul said that as far as to be in his position and doing the work that he was doing, it was better for him not to be married. And the same could go for people today. Could be better for you not to be married. The Roman Catholic Church agrees it's better for some not to marry, and they forbid their Pope from being married. I guess a lot of their priests are not allowed to be married. Jesus simply told the disciples it's not for everybody. But it was very clear what God's plan and original intent for marriage was. And that was just simply one man, one woman for life. That may not be for everybody. You need to think about that before you decide you want to get married, because it is supposed to be for life. So rather than focus on the negative about all of this, if we focus on the positive side of it, what would that be? I get to be married for the rest of my life. That's a good thing. Especially for the women. Nobody's going to be handing you a certificate of paper and saying, goodbye, get out of here. No, you're supposed to be married for life. How many in here have been married 50 years or more? There's 2, 3 hands up. How about 40 years? 50 over here too? There's several 50 years and several 40-year marriages. These would be excellent people to talk to if you're finding yourself in a problem. And what marriage is there that hasn't seen a problem somewhere along the line? Is there a 60-year in here? Well, like I said, we need to make our prenuptial agreement to be, we will resolve all problems. We will stay together. This is what we're going to do. This is our intent. And unless I die, you're stuck with me. And we're going to figure it out. For better or best. Pardon me? Yes, absolutely. That's another whole topic by itself as to whether a member of the church should even consider marrying someone outside of the church. Definitely better to be both the same. Yeah, that happens. Many of them go within months. They don't go a year after their spouse dies. Today we have psychologists and counselors who specialize in marriage, and they make a lot of money trying to help people. One of the things that they say is that men and women are different, and they have different needs. For instance, a woman needs to feel loved. Everyone does need to feel loved, but women more so than men. Women need to hear it and see it and feel it over and over and over and over and over. Men, is that asking too much? It's the same way with our children. As your children grow up or your grandchildren grow up, would you like to hear them say, see you later, I love you, as they go bouncing out the door? If you'd like to hear that, how do you do that? Well, you start when they're infants, and you're pouring it on them. They hear I love you so many times, it's not embarrassing for them to turn around and say they love you. It starts when they're infants. These same experts, they say that men, although they need to be loved too, they're more concerned about respect. I remember my grandmother saying about my grandpa, you have to let him think he's the boss. It seemed to work for them. They were like the one you were mentioning, they died within months of each other. It was like he was just living to take care of her. And when she was gone, he was gone. But before they had the experts, people used to look in the Bible. If you want to turn over to Ephesians chapter 5, I don't know if we have time to read it now or not. Maybe. Ephesians chapter 5, 22 through 33. Wives, submit to your husbands as to the Lord, for the husband is the head of the wife, as Christ is the head of the church, his body, of which he is the Savior. Now as the church submits to Christ, so wives should submit to their husbands in everything. Husbands, love your wives, just as Christ loved the church and gave himself up for her, to make her holy, cleansing her by the washing with water through the word, and not to present herself to him, to present herself to him as a radiant church, without stain, without wrinkle, without any blemish, holy and blameless. In this same way, husbands ought to love their wives as their own bodies. He who loves his wife loves himself. After all, no one ever hated his own body, but he feeds it and cares for it, just as Christ does the church. For we are members of his body. For this reason, a man will leave his father and mother and be united to his wife, and the two will become one flesh. This is a profound mystery, but I'm talking about Christ and the church. However, each of you also must love his wife. How about that? The Bible says 4 times here in this reading, husbands, love your wives unconditionally, over and over, repetitively. Love your wives. That's what she needs. And women, the last thing in verse 33, wives must respect her husband. It's where the experts got the knowledge out of the Bible. Thank you, everyone, for being here. Don't forget, next week we want to double our attendance.